But it was, so we were talking, I mean, it's really important that, you know, we deal with the sort of agricultural biodiversity loss. But it was something that you said in your book about, you know, more on a garden sort of landscape scale, or larger garden, larger landscape scale, about, you know, one can be organic, one could not use any chemicals, but inadvertently one could be actually bringing in chemicals, nasty chemicals, actually into your garden, but that are already in the plants.
Yeah, I mean, it is depressing, but it's true that, you know, I love to go to the garden centre and wander around and see all these beautiful plants on sale, and they look great, don't they? You know, they often look much better than they will when they're in your garden,
Yeah.
and you're really green fingered. But you know, it's not a secret why they look so good. They've been drenched in fertilizers and pesticides, generally, not always, but usually. And many of them are imported from, you know, big intensive kind of horticulture units, often in the Netherlands, where, you know, huge areas of these plants are intensively reared, and so they're full of all sorts of residues.
Because it's twofold, isn't it? Because a lot of these plants are, you know, total clones, because I think a lot of them are micro propagators, so they're totally cloned, and they're full of chemicals. I think that's a double whammy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, you know, it's kind of ironic in a way, because people think of gardening as a green activity, but actually a lot of the industry that supports it is far from green. You know, this massive kind of industrial manufacture of ornamental plants that get then distributed to nurseries. And when you think about it, you know, driving to your garden centre to buy a whole bunch of intensively reared plants full of pesticides, probably being grown in a peat-based compost, and they're being sold in a disposable plastic pot.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing very green about any of that. And gardening can be fantastic for wildlife, but it can also be pretty harmful. And you know, we should think about that a little bit more. So just to go back to these plants, I mean, we basically we drove around all the big name garden centres near Brighton, you know, the Wyvale, Homebase, B&Q, all the usual suspects. Yeah. And we bought the plants that they were selling with bee-friendly logos on them. Lots of them use the RHS's Perfect for Pollinator logo.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're correctly labeling plants that are really attractive to bees and butterflies and so on. And we screened them for pesticides. And there was only one individual plant that we couldn't find any pesticides in. Nearly all of them had a whole cocktail of insecticides and fungicides in them. And so, if I remember correctly, 75% contained insecticides, and 70% contained neonicotinoid insecticides, which have sort of become notorious as being especially toxic to bees, for good reason. So, I mean, I think it's really scandalous that, you know, people are well-meaning people who want to garden for insect life, are going to garden centres and buying stuff, plants that are actually going to poison the insects in their garden. They surely contravene some kind of trading standards or something. There is a bit of a footnote to this story, which is that the Friends of the Earth ran a campaign on the back of our study to get the garden centres to promise to stop using these neonicotinoids on their bee-friendly plant range, and all the big names have promised to do that. Whether they're doing it in reality, no one's checked. We haven't got money to repeat the study, unfortunately, as yet. And they will almost certainly will have replaced them with other insecticides anyway, which isn't great. But it's a small step in the right direction, I suppose.
But it actually made me think after reading that about, you know, how we all of us in the sort of in the supply chain, and how we specify, you know, landscape architects, designers, you know, architects as well. They've got to, I think, when we've got to put it into our contracts, that we've got to, you know, you've got to show provenance of plants. You know, perhaps, you know, perhaps we can't get, you know, totally pesticide-free plants. Perhaps we look more to seeded landscapes, not necessarily just talking about meadows, but, you know, having seeded landscapes. So perhaps we can avoid this part of the supply chain, which I assume is probably to turn around industrial horticultural processes in here in England and in Europe. It might be a big ship to turn around, perhaps.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, it will take a long time, and unfortunately, the horticulture industry is you know, reluctant to engage, shall I say? It certainly is my impression. They did their best to criticise our research on pesticides in their flowers. They tried to claim that, you know, the plants we'd chosen weren't representative, that they were only from the south of England, was one of the criticisms, as if, you know, the plants in a Y vale in the south of England are going to be fundamentally different from those somewhere else. It was nonsense. But rather than saying, you know, okay, there's an issue here, what can we do about it? They just tried to kind of play it down and deny it, which was frustrating. Anyway, I mean, there are alternatives. There are organic nurseries out there, and, you know, a lot of stuff can be propagated from seed or whatever yourself. When it comes to, you know, advising individual homeowners, then actually it's quite difficult. It's quite easy to avoid buying these plants if you've got the time and patience to buy seeds and grow from seed, or things like plant swaps with your, you know, one of the simplest and greenest things you can do is plant swap with your friends and neighbours, because, you know, anything that grows well in your area, you'll probably find it if you look in the front gardens of the houses nearby, and most gardeners are happy to spare a snippet or two, or, you know, a little bit of a root cutting or whatever, and off you go. So there are, you know, more environmentally benign ways of doing it, but perhaps not if you're a, you know, professional garden designer. That's more of a challenge, I would guess.
It is more